Right. So you know that feeling. It's Friday at 5 p.m. You've just wrapped up another exhausting 40-hour week.
Oh, absolutely. The classic Friday burnout.
Exactly. You sit down, check your bank account, and well, after rent, groceries, utilities, you're basically in the exact same financial position you were in 2 weeks ago.
Right. Like you haven't moved an inch forward.
Yeah, and then you open your phone, scroll through social media, and see someone who just, I mean, they seem to effortlessly multiply their net worth while sleeping. It is infuriating.
It is deeply frustrating.
Yeah.
And that frustration, well, it usually triggers this immediate defense mechanism in us.
Oh, sure.
We tell ourselves that wealth is just a byproduct of extreme luck.
Yeah.
We see a massive trust fund or a big real estate portfolio, and we just write it off as an unearned head start.
Right. We say rich kids are just lucky. But today, we are taking a deep dive into some fascinating excerpts from a source called The Owner's Operating System, AI, and the Math of Wealth. And our mission here is to look past that initial reflexive resentment. Because we have to ask, is that resentment actually a psychological anchor?
Mm.
Is it blinding everyday people to a completely different set of mathematical rules that are playing out right in front of us?
Yeah, that is the core argument we're looking at today from the material. The text suggests that the traditional working class path, relying solely on a W-2 job, is no longer just a slow path to retirement. In the age of artificial intelligence, it has actually become a dangerous trap.
A trap. Wow.
Yeah, the divide between the wealthy and the working class isn't simply about current bank balances. It begins with something far more fundamental, which is vocabulary.
Oh, the vocabulary gap. That is fascinating. Like if you listen to dinner table conversations across different income brackets, they're operating in entirely different languages.
Right, exactly.
A working class family talks about the mortgage payment, surviving the winter utility bill, or, hoping for a 3% cost of living raise. I mean, the entire focus is on surviving immediate short-term expenses.
While the wealthy dinner table sounds more like a corporate boardroom,
Yeah.
they're discussing market trends, tax shields, equity structures, leverage. The child sitting at that table absorbs the concept that money is a tool to be deployed,
Right.
not just a scarce resource to be hoarded.
Right. So while normal parents are teaching their kids to put $10 in a piggy bank and just leave it there, wealthy parents are teaching their kids how to acquire assets that independently produce $10 an hour.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift.
Which raises an obvious question for you, the listener. If we are playing the game with the wrong vocabulary, where did we learn those words? Like, why is the default setting for the majority of the population to focus purely on wages and saving?
Well, the source argues we learned it by design, in school. Yeah. The financial illiteracy of the general public isn't an accident. It's a highly engineered outcome of the early 20th century industrial economic system.
Okay, so the entire educational framework was built for one specific macroeconomic purpose, which was to produce compliant factory workers,
Right.
operators.
Right. And the school system was built to mimic that exact environment. You show up at the set time, you obey the bells, you follow instruction.
You literally have to ask permission to go to the bathroom.
Exactly. You are rewarded for compliance.
Yeah.
You're explicitly trained to be an operator, never an owner. The curriculum intentionally omitted education on capital accumulation. They might have taught you how to balance a checkbook so you could pay your taxes, sure.
Right.
But they certainly never taught you how to read a balance sheet, analyze cash flow, or structure debt.
But I want to challenge this narrative slightly if I can.
Go for it.
I mean, society needed operators back then, sure. It's like everyday workers walked into a modern financial battlefield armed with a survival manual from the 1950s. But even today, if everyone builds their own mini corporation and focuses on capital accumulation, who actually does the fundamental work? If the corporate system is so brilliant at keeping us compliant and dependent on a bi-weekly paycheck, how do the wealthy actually break out of this programming?
Well, it used to be about human risk tolerance, yes. But that is exactly what makes this deep dive so urgent today. The system no longer needs human operators in the way it did 50 years ago.
Ah, because of technology.
Yes, software, robotics, and now artificial intelligence are becoming the new operator class. The humans who insist on remaining operators are competing against machines that do not sleep, do not need health insurance, and operate at a fraction of the cost.
Wow, so that vocabulary gap explains the mindset, but the actual engine keeping the working class trapped is the math itself. The material lays out what it calls the brutal math of the W-2, and it is staggering when you look at it objectively.
It really is depressing math.
Let's take someone making a $120,000 W-2 salary. In the traditional mindset, that is the pinnacle of success. That's the safe, golden path.
But the source points out it's the ultimate illusion of safety. Let's look at the mechanics of why that W-2 income is the highest taxed, least efficient way to generate wealth. First, the government takes its cut before you even see the money.
Right.
Between federal, state, and payroll taxes, you are vaporizing roughly 30 to 35% immediately.
Poof. Gone before the check clears.
Right, so that 120,000 is actually closer to 80,000.
And then comes the invisible tax, inflation. And we're not talking about the smoothed out consumer price index numbers on the evening news. We're talking about the actual lived cost of housing, energy, food.
Which runs closer to 6 or 7% a year in real terms. The text calls this fiat depreciation. It uses this great analogy, comparing it to watering down a bowl of soup.
Oh, I love that. Like, you have the same volume of soup, but fewer nutrients in every bite.
Exactly. So that $80,000 instantly loses another $5,000 to $6,000 in purchasing power. Without spending a single dime on a luxury, without taking a single vacation, this person has lost nearly 40% of their labor's value. You're essentially running up a down escalator.
Okay, but wait. The material argues the wealthy combat this by using debt. And normal middle-class advice says all debt is evil. How is borrowing against assets not just building a dangerous house of cards? If a normal person tries to borrow against a savings account, they'll get laughed out of the bank.
That's a crucial distinction. The wealthy do not start by borrowing. They start by fundamentally changing what they exchange their currency for. The middle class takes that heavily taxed W-2 income and uses debt to buy depreciating consumer goods.
Like cars, televisions, luxury clothes.
Yeah. They go into debt for things that lose value over time. While the wealthy convert their currency into hard assets, real estate, equities, businesses, they buy assets that inflate in value specifically because the underlying currency is losing its purchasing power.
Ah, so they capture the upside of the inflation.
Yes. And once they've built that asset base, then the debt strategy comes in. Let's say their asset grows by $120,000 in value. If they sell it to get the cash, well, they trigger capital gains taxes.
Which defeats the purpose.
Right, so they don't sell. Instead, they borrow against the asset. Debt is not considered income, so it is completely tax-free.
Wow. So they might secure a loan against their portfolio at, say, a 4% interest rate. They get the cash, and they owe zero to the IRS.
Exactly. And because the asset itself is growing at maybe 8 to 10% a year, the asset's internal growth easily covers the 4% cost of the loan. They capture the spread, they keep the appreciating asset, get the tax-free cash, and maintain their leverage.
Meanwhile, the W-2 earner bled 40% of their life energy just to get the same amount of liquid cash.
Exactly.
Man, that is mathematically terrifying. So, if the numbers so clearly favor ownership and asset acquisition, why don't people switch paths? We can clearly see the math. Why do we stay on the down escalator?
Well, the source argues it's because the human brain is practically hardwired to fail at finance. We suffer from deep cognitive biases, and wealthy families actively train their children to override these, the most dangerous one being loss aversion.
Right, loss aversion, which is the psychological reality that the pain of losing $50 feels significantly more intense than the joy of gaining $50.
Yes. It keeps you paralyzed. It forces you to prioritize the feeling of short-term safety over the mathematical reality of long-term growth. You choose the guaranteed biweekly paycheck, even if inflation guarantees you will be poor in 20 years, just because the alternative involves short-term uncertainty.
Yeah, and the source gives this painfully relatable example of a hypothetical guy named Evan. You might be listening to Evan's setup and thinking, well, what's the problem? That sounds like a great life.
He sounds very successful on paper.
Right. Evan is a senior copywriter at a mid-sized marketing agency. He makes $90,000 a year. He gets health insurance, 2 weeks of paid vacation, a small match on his retirement account. I mean, in his mind, Evan is entirely secure.
But he only feels secure because of status quo bias. His environment has been relatively stable for the last 5 years, so his brain lazily assumes it will remain stable for the next 20. He just clocks in, writes his copy, and expects the corporate machine to take care of him. Plus, he has an $80,000 4-year communications degree.
Which introduces the sunk cost fallacy. He refuses to pivot into learning a more technical, high-leverage skill because he feels he has to justify that initial 4-year investment in his degree.
Exactly. But Evan's real problem is purely structural. His entire income stream is inextricably tied to his direct physical labor. If Evan gets sick, his income stops.
Yeah.
If he wants to double his income, he has to work twice as many hours, which is biologically impossible. He has a single point of failure.
But isn't Evan taking the smart, safe route by avoiding the casino of the stock market or the stress of entrepreneurship? I mean, he's just putting in his time.
He thinks he's playing it safe. But the text points out he is taking what is called a symmetric risk. He's trading exactly 1 hour of his finite time for 1 hour of static pay. There's a hard ceiling on his upside, but his downside is complete ruin if he loses the job.
And wealthy families don't do that.
No, wealthy families train their kids to seek the exact opposite, asymmetric risk.
Meaning the potential upside is massively disproportionate to the downside. Like a $1 lottery ticket for $1 million, except, not based on luck.
Right, exactly. They teach their kids that the real risk isn't losing $1,000 trying to build a small business. The real risk is locking in a guaranteed path to mediocrity for 40 years. In the real world, asymmetric risk looks like writing a piece of code once and it sells 1,000,000 times. Or building a digital system that generates value while you sleep. You detach your finite time from your income. Evan has not done that.
And that illusion of safety completely shatters when we introduce the ultimate technological lever into the equation: artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this is where Evan's story takes a harsh turn. Suddenly, Evan's agency realizes they can license a specialized language model for $20 a month. And that model outputs marketing copy faster, cheaper, and frankly, often better than Evan can.
Right.
Evan is no longer competing with other human copywriters. He's competing with endless, tireless compute power.
And the worst part is, the AI doesn't even use the ping pong table in the break room. It requires zero overhead. When the agency inevitably lays him off, his entire financial ecosystem collapses overnight.
Right. The safe job was actually the most vulnerable position he could hold because he had zero leverage and no secondary income streams. AI just dropped the cost of building systems to near zero, and Evan was on the wrong side of the equation.
Because of this technological shift, the material argues that society is currently bifurcating into two highly distinct classes.
Yes, a tale of two classes. On one side, you have the unleveraged operators. These are the people clinging to the old rules, trying to compete with AI by just working longer hours or getting more certificates. They face modern serfdom.
Wow, serfdom.
Yeah, renting their homes, leasing their cars, watching their standard of living collapse, while the value of their manual skills depreciates rapidly.
And on the other side, you have the AI-enabled owners. These are the people who understand leverage. They use algorithms to expand their profit margins and scale exponentially. They don't work harder. They build smarter machines that work for them.
Yes.
So using AI just to do your W-2 job a little faster so you can watch more Netflix is totally missing the point.
Completely missing.
You're just handing your boss a better power tool to build their equity. I mean, you are optimizing the machine that you do not own.
Precisely. If you don't own the system, you're just a gear inside of it. Every time an AI model improves, the owner's business gets more efficient and profitable. If you are the employee, that same improvement makes you increasingly obsolete.
Okay, this brings us to the pivot, the actionable solution provided in the text, because we don't want to just outline the impending threat of AI. If the W-2 path is a structural trap, how does the listener actually become an owner? The material provides a very specific blueprint for this called the income-to-asset pipeline.
It does, and it starts with a fundamental mindset shift. You have to stop viewing your current W-2 job as your identity. Instead, you treat your current job as your first angel investor.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's providing you with the seed funding necessary to build your actual business.
Keep your overhead low, live below your means, and use that steady paycheck to fund your escape velocity. So let's walk through the actual steps of this pipeline.
Step one is to identify a high-leverage skill that AI cannot easily replicate right now. This means moving away from pure low-level execution, writing basic emails or standard coding, and moving toward complex system design, strategic sales, or capital allocation.
Got it. And step two is where you bring the technology in. You use AI tools to automate the low-level execution of that skill. You let the machines do the heavy lifting of the routine work.
Then comes step three, which is the most critical. You productize the service, you stop billing by the hour, you start billing by the outcome, you package your automated workflow into a digital asset or a retainable service business.
Let's actually ground this. What does that tangibly look like for Evan? Let's say he doesn't get fired, but he sees the writing on the wall. He's currently billing his time. How does he fundamentally detach his time from his income using this pipeline?
Well, instead of taking freelance writing gigs on the side where he trades 10 hours to write 5 articles for $500, Evan identifies a broader system. He realizes businesses don't actually want articles, they want customer leads.
Right.
So he uses AI to automate the drafting of highly targeted, SEO-optimized content. He uses another AI tool to automate the distribution of that content across social channels. He packages this entire workflow as a traffic generation system.
Ah, so he isn't selling his hours anymore. He is selling the output of his digital machine.
Yes, he approaches a business and charges them $3,000 a month for the system. Because the AI is doing the heavy execution, managing that client takes Evan maybe 2 hours of high-level strategy a week. He just multiplied his leverage exponentially. That is what it means to build a one-person corporation.
And then step 4 is the compounding loop. You take the cash flow generated by that productized business and you invest it into hard assets, real estate, index funds, creating compounding leverage.
Now, there's a very strict warning included in the source about tooling.
Oh, right.
If you are building this one-person corporation, you have to use verified enterprise-grade software. Do not build your systems on garbage platforms or chase hype-driven crypto scams, or your entire operational architecture will literally collapse under pressure.
Build on solid ground. But I want to go back to a phrase you used earlier, capital allocation. We hear this term thrown around a lot in wealth building circles, but what does capital allocation actually look like for someone starting from zero, someone who doesn't have millions to invest?
Well, the source explains capital allocation as deploying dollars like soldiers to capture territory. If you have a limited amount of capital, you don't just spread it randomly. You allocate those dollars to the specific vehicles that yield the highest compound growth.
But the middle class doesn't deploy dollars that way.
No, the tragedy of the middle class is that they allocate their most finite, precious resource, which is their biological time, into a depreciating vehicle, a job. The wealthy allocate their money into appreciating vehicles. When you're starting from zero, capital allocation means taking a portion of your W-2 seed funding and buying the right software subscriptions or paying for digital infrastructure rather than buying a nicer car to commute to the job you hate.
It's the difference between upgrading your lifestyle versus upgrading your leverage. You are buying the server space and the AI tools to build the system that eventually sets you free.
You have to take extreme ownership of your financial architecture today. The texts we are exploring are very clear on this timeline. The artificial divide between labor and capital is closing, but it's only closing for those who use AI to build leverage.
And that window is not going to stay open forever. The people who are aggressively adopting AI to build digital assets right now are establishing a massive moat. In 5 years, the wealth concentration for these early adopters is going to be virtually insurmountable for anyone trying to start late.
That's the reality.
Every single day you wait is a day your unleveraged labor loses a little more value and those hard assets become a little more expensive.
The overarching rule of this new economy has permanently changed. You're either building the machine or you're going to be replaced by it.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the math of wealth, I want to bring us back to you, the listener, back to that feeling we talked about at the very beginning. That Friday at 5 p.m. exhaustion, that frustration of trading 40 hours of your finite life just to tread water while the cost of living keeps rising.
It is an incredibly painful, stressful place to be.
But the difference now is that you see the math. You understand the vocabulary. You know the difference between symmetric risk and asymmetric leverage. So I want to leave you with this final practical thought to mull over. If your W-2 salary is truly just seed funding for your own mini corporation, what specific digital asset or system are you going to buy or build with your very next paycheck to ensure you aren't the one being replaced?